Like, bottle up the essence of those incredible success stories? You know, the kind that just leave you pumped up and ready to tackle any challenge? Well, today we've got something really special lined up. We're going to take a deep dive into the Singapore model, those remarkable economic and social blueprints that took Singapore from a developing nation facing some serious obstacles and transformed it into a thriving, high income economy in just a handful of decades.
It's a story overflowing with insights that could spark entirely new ways of thinking about growth and progress, not just for nations, but even for us as individuals.
Absolutely. And to do this deep dive right, we've compiled a ton of information from Singapore's own journey to all the global buzz it's created.
We're going to unpack the core principles of this model and see why it's captured the attention of leaders worldwide.
Our mission today is to give you that clear understanding without getting bogged down in the complexities.
Think of it like getting the cheat sheet to a really inspiring story about what we can achieve with vision, strategic planning, and a good dose of determination.
I love that. A cheat sheet for success. All right, let's rewind the clock back to Singapore before 1965.
Okay, so picture this.
For over a century, it was a British crown colony, a bustling port city, no doubt, but its economic future was anything but certain. Let's just say they had their work cut out for them.
Yeah, the scale of the challenges they faced at independence, it was truly massive. We're talking about a nation starting with a relatively underdeveloped economy, a tiny local market, and a population where education wasn't universal.
Wow.
And it doesn't stop there. Add high unemployment to the mix, social divisions, a lack of basic social safety nets or even public housing, and even genuine concerns about national security. It was a really steep uphill battle.
It sounds pretty overwhelming, to be honest.
It was. But that's what makes Singapore's transformation all the more remarkable.
So into this complex landscape enters a truly transformative leader, Lee Kuan Yew.
Oh, absolutely. Lee Kuan Yew's influence is undeniable. His 31 years as prime minister, which ended in 1990, and even his continued impact after that, were absolutely instrumental in shaping Singapore's path and its whole approach to nation building.
He really set the stage for what Singapore would become.
He did, and alongside places like Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, Singapore rose to prominence as one of those Asian tigers. You know, that term that gets thrown around to describe those economies that saw this incredibly rapid growth.
Right. But what's interesting about Singapore is that they took a slightly different path to economic development compared to some of their neighbors.
That's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah, unlike some other developing economies in Asia, Singapore made a conscious choice to not lean too heavily on those protectionist policies to build up their own massive domestic industries. Instead, they went all in on attracting foreign direct investment.
Right, especially from those big multinational corporations.
Exactly. They saw those global players as key to their strategy.
A very deliberate choice.
But it's worth mentioning, even with that focus on foreign investment, they were smart about nurturing some key local manufacturing sectors, especially in those up-and-coming computer hardware and semiconductor industries. Think companies like Creative Technology, Systems on Silicon Manufacturing, Chartered Semiconductor Manufacturing, UTAC Group, those kinds of players.
Yeah, that targeted support really helped.
So, zooming in on those early years, let's say roughly 1959 to 1973, how did they actually go about attracting that investment? What were the concrete actions they took to lay the foundation for that explosive growth?
Well, one of the very first pivotal moves was setting up the Economic Development Board. We know it as the EDB, back in 1961. That became the heart and soul of crafting and implementing the nation's economic strategies. And their early focus was laser sharp on building a strong manufacturing sector. They were incredibly proactive about finding and backing those industries that showed real promise.
So, it wasn't just about setting up shop and hoping for the best.
Definitely not. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work. They literally built the spaces needed for industry to take off, developing industrial estates. Jurong is probably the most famous example.
Ah, you're wrong. It's become almost synonymous with Singapore's industrial might.
Right. These estates provided all the infrastructure, all the resources, everything businesses needed to get up and running and then to scale up.
Smart. So they made it easy for companies to come in and set up shop.
Exactly. And to sweeten the deal, they also introduced some attractive tax incentives. It was a combination that really helped to propel their manufacturing toward producing those higher value-added goods, which meant greater economic returns.
Makes sense.
It's about creating a win-win.
So beyond that manufacturing push, what other factors contributed to this initial burst of progress and helped build momentum?
Well, you have to remember that the service industry also started to really gain traction. A lot of that was fueled by the increasing activity at Singapore's port, all that international trade flowing through.
Right. That makes sense given their strategic location.
And something pretty remarkable happened. They managed to attract those major global oil companies, the big names like Shell and Esso. By the mid 1970s, Singapore had become, believe it or not, the third largest oil refining center in the entire world.
Wow. That's incredible considering where they started just a few years earlier.
It really speaks to their vision, their strategy, and their ability to execute.
So it seems like they were firing on all cylinders. And underpinning all of this economic development, I can't help but think about their emphasis on education.
Oh, that's a vital piece of the puzzle. It really can't be overstated. The government made this huge forward-thinking investment in building an education system where English was the main language of instruction.
Interesting.
It's a very deliberate decision to align Singapore with international business and technology.
Smart. So they were thinking long term.
Absolutely. And they didn't stop there. They also put a big emphasis on practical and vocational training. They wanted to ensure they had this skilled workforce that was ready to meet the needs of these new, rapidly growing industries. That focus on developing their human capital was absolutely foundational to their success.
So it wasn't just about bringing in the money, it was about making sure they had the right people to make the most of that investment.
Precisely. It was about creating that fertile ground for growth.
And I remember reading that Singapore's location played a significant role too. It's not just about being in the right place at the right time, it's about leveraging that position.
Absolutely. They didn't just sit back and rely on their location, they used it strategically. It became this key selling point to attract foreign capital, particularly through things like grants. In those early stages, their focus was on export-oriented trade and those labor-intensive industries, and their location was a huge part of that.
Right, it makes perfect sense.
They saw it as a resource to be cultivated and promoted, and they really did that effectively.
Then there's that amazing story of public housing.
Yes.
That's another big piece of the Singapore model, right? It's not just about giving people a roof over their heads, it's something much bigger.
Oh, it definitely goes beyond just bricks and mortar. The Housing and Development Board, the HDB, that's a cornerstone of Singaporean society. Their massive public housing program was truly transformative on so many
It's
levels.
just hard to overstate the impact,
Yeah,
right?
it really is. They achieved these remarkably high rates of homeownership. That, in turn, fosters this strong sense of stability and even national identity. But it also had this amazing knock-on effect of stimulating the domestic consumer market, and it fostered this sense of shared prosperity and national unity.
That's pretty remarkable. And wasn't the Central Provident Fund, the CPF, also a part of this picture?
Oh, absolutely. The CPF is a mandatory savings scheme, and it's been a key ingredient in this virtuous cycle we're talking about.
So it's more than just a savings plan.
Way more. It covers things like retirement, healthcare, housing. It contributes to social stability and provides this huge pool of funds for national development projects. It's like a system designed for long-term security and collective progress.
That's brilliant. Okay, so they've got these strong foundations. Then, as we move into the mid 1970s and early 80s, I remember a lot of the sources talked about rapid growth. What was happening during that period?
Yeah, you see this real acceleration of their economic engine. Between 1974 and 1985, they entered a phase of really rapid development. They were building on their trading expertise and starting to move beyond simple entrepot trade and into more sophisticated process manufacturing. This is where you see a real deepening of their industrial capabilities.
It's like they leveled up.
Exactly. They were moving up the value chain.
And this was also when Singapore started to make its mark on the world stage in some pretty big ways, right?
You're absolutely right. The opening of Changi Airport in 1981, that was a huge statement.
Changi is often ranked as one of the best airports in the world.
It really is a marvel. And they made this very strategic decision to develop Singapore Airlines into a major international carrier. They recognized the crucial role that aviation would play in their future, in their goal of becoming this global hub,
Makes sense. They were thinking ahead.
always. And of course, the port of Singapore, that just kept growing and growing, becoming one of the busiest in the world. That really solidified their importance in global trade.
So they were really hitting their stride, but with such rapid growth, there must have been new challenges to tackle. I remember reading about those labor shortages that started cropping up.
Yes. You bring up a really important point about managing growth sustainably. As their economy expanded so rapidly, the relatively small population meant that they started running into labor shortages.
Oh, I see. Supply and demand.
Exactly. The government had to come up with a solution, and they did it with a two-pronged approach. They implemented immigration policies to boost their workforce, but they also got smart about managing the growth of local labor costs. They did that by increasing the contribution rates to the CPF for employers.
So balancing the needs of businesses with the well-being of their workforce.
It was a delicate balancing act, and it shows their ability to adapt and respond to those shifting economic realities.
That adaptability seems to be a recurring theme in their success.
It's definitely a key takeaway.
Then, as we head into the late 80s and 90s, we see this noticeable shift towards the service industry. What was driving that change?
Well, it was all about ensuring long-term sustainability. By the mid-1980s, they started to see potential issues like the real estate market getting a bit overheated, and those labor costs we talked about were on the rise. They knew they needed to diversify their economic engines to stay strong. That's when the push towards developing the service industry, especially in finance and information services, became a top priority.
So, recognizing that relying solely on manufacturing had its limitations.
Especially in a small and open economy like theirs, diversification is crucial for long-term resilience.
And then comes the Asian financial crisis in 1997. How did that impact Singapore, and what lessons did they take away from that experience?
It's interesting. While that crisis had a huge impact on the region, Singapore was relatively less affected than many of their neighbors.
Oh,
But it served as a powerful reminder about how interconnected the global economy is and that external shocks can happen. It reinforced the importance of prudent financial management and the need to constantly adapt their economic policies to build resilience.
so weathering the storm.
Exactly.
And it sounds like their response was to double down on their strengths and look to the future.
Absolutely. They went into overdrive, focusing on developing those knowledge-based industries and actively fostering innovation within their borders. The government really made it their mission to create an environment that was ripe for research and development and for technological advancement.
Wow.
And it's paid off big time. Singapore has cemented itself as a leading regional and global hub for finance, technology, and information, even in those cutting-edge areas like automation and fintech. It's a testament to their long-term thinking and their commitment to staying ahead of the curve.
What an inspiring story of continuous growth and adaptation. It makes sense that the Singapore model is seen as a huge success, celebrated for its high levels of economic development and its reputation for clean, efficient governance. It makes you wonder, though, is this a model that other nations can realistically aim for, even try to replicate?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And it's one that a lot of countries are actively grappling with. We've seen examples of nations in Africa, like Ghana and Rwanda, who are openly looking to Singapore for inspiration, exploring ways to adopt aspects of their approach. Montenegro and El Salvador have also expressed similar aspirations.
El Salvador is a particularly fascinating case, with President Nayib Bukele being quite vocal about his ambition to create this Singapore of Central America. He's even woven Bitcoin into his vision, along with ambitious infrastructure projects like that Pacific train and major reforms across different sectors. It's a pretty bold undertaking.
It really is, and I think it shows the inspirational power of the Singapore model on leaders worldwide. We've also seen interest in Israel, with figures like politician Naftali Bennett expressing a desire to implement a Singapore plan for their economy, with a focus on innovation and high-tech growth.
And even closer to home, in the UK, during those heated Brexit discussions, remember that concept of Singapore on the Thames that was floating around?
Yeah, remember that.
Figures like former Chancellor Philip Hammond, they envisioned a post-Brexit Britain that would embrace a low-tax, free market economy, to compete on the global stage.
It was all about creating this dynamic, outward-looking economy, very much mirroring Singapore's agility and approach.
Right.
But, and this is important, the sources also highlight that there was a lot of debate and even skepticism around this idea. Concerns were raised about those significant cultural and geographical differences, questioning whether direct replication was even possible or desirable.
Those are valid points.
And even Angela Merkel, she pointed out some potential economic implications for the EU.
So, while the Singapore model is undeniably inspiring, It's clear that transferring it wholesale is a complex issue with a lot of nuances.
Nuance is the key word there.
There's even a discussion about the role of Asian values
Yeah?
and Confucianism in Singapore's development, right?
Right, that's a really fascinating angle. Leaders in Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew being a prime example, they often talked about the influence of those values on their social cohesion and their economic success. But to what extent those cultural factors are the main drivers, as opposed to those specific policies they implemented, well, that's a discussion that continues today. It's a complex interplay of culture and policy.
Absolutely. It's not a simple equation.
Definitely not.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that Singapore's journey, going from a nation facing some really tough challenges to becoming this global economic powerhouse, it's a powerful testament to their strategic policymaking, their unwavering focus on attracting foreign investment in those key sectors, and their incredible ability to adapt, innovate, and stay ahead of the game in an ever-changing world.
It's truly inspiring.
It is.
And for you, our listener, I think understanding the core principles and this incredible story of the Singapore model, it gives you these valuable insights into the possibilities of transformative economic development, into the power of strategic governance. It's a real-world example of what you can achieve with a clear vision, consistent execution, and a commitment to progress.
So well said. And on that inspiring note, here's a final thought to ponder as you reflect on Singapore's remarkable journey. Given Singapore's unique circumstances, its size, its specific history, its approach to governance, what aspects of its model do you think hold the most promise for being successfully adapted and implemented in other nations that are striving for those same levels of economic progress? And what factors might prove to be the biggest